This week, Fred Wilmot from Detect Team is with us to discuss distractions in InfoSec. Then Danny Wolf from Audience First joins us to talk about what marketers should learn from security researchers. Finally, in the enterprise security news, over $500 million in funding this week as everyone gets their pre-Black Hat announcements out. Mimecast picks up Code 42. Will Cato Networks IPO? Canary tokens update. We still have some CrowdStrike fallout to discuss, CISO responses to SEC rules, making things secure without security tools, tips for going sockless, denial of service robots, all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Graylog elevates enterprise-level cybersecurity through its comprehensive SIEM, centralized log management, and API security solutions. Built on the Graylog platform, Graylog Security combines SIEM, security analytics, threat detection, and incident response capabilities. Unlike traditional SIEMs, which offer complex and costly setups, Graylog Security simplifies security and operational challenges with an optimal blend of licensing, people, and infrastructure costs. To see a demo, visit securityweekly.com/Graylog. If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The 2024 Level Blue Futures Report sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/levelblue. Cybersecurity simplified. It is time to make network and security simpler and more flexible. Ariaka helps enterprises modernize, optimize, and transform their network and security experience with Ariaka Unified SASE as a service, the only solution that delivers performance, agility, simplicity, and security without trade-offs. Ariaka Unified SASE as a service is a purpose-built, cloud-based offering that securely connects users and applications anywhere in the world. Visit securityweekly.com/Ariaka, that's ARYAKA, to learn more. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Girlfriend's Day. This is episode 370, recorded on Thursday, August 1st, 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of Agentless, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler-Santullo. How are you doing, Katie?
I am well. How are you, Globetrotter?
I'm good. Celebrating National Girlfriend's Day, which I guess if it's national, it applies to the U.S. I don't know. But I'm in Brazil, the place where my girlfriend was born. So that's how I'm celebrating. It's been a lot
You're
of fun.
celebrating your girlfriend by going off and doing a podcast.
Yep.
I think you might owe her a nice fancy drink after this. How's that?
Oh, I mean, we've been in Brazil. There's been nothing but fancy drinks.
When in Brazil, nothing but that sounds good.
Agua de coco, even just water is a fancy thing. You know, they slice off the top of the coconut and hand you a straw. It's wonderful.
Sounds terrible. What a terrible life you lead, sir.
It's rough.
It's rough being you, Adrian.
All right, quick announcement, then we'll jump into the interview. We're always looking for great guests for all the Security Weekly shows. You can submit your suggestions by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. I noticed 2 came in today that I'm going to have to go and check out. So thank you for submitting those. All right, so today's topic is going to be a fun one. It's cybersecurity's love affair with distractions is the title I decided to go on this one. There are lots of titles we could have gone with. And we're excited to have...
Who? What? Sorry, I had to.
And we're excited to have Fred Wilmot, CEO and founder of Detect Team. Prior to Detect Team, Fred was head of product and engineering at Interpris, building a CTEM platform. He was also the first CISO at JumpCloud, the first CISO at Devo, and the CEO/CTO at Packet Sled. and finally was the founder of the global security practice at Splunk, and also co-founded the Red Team Village at DEF CON, which is coming up next week. Welcome, Fred.
Thanks, brother. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a lot of good experience there. So I mean, if you look at my career, it's just bouncing around all over the place. A little bit of everything. But your career looks a lot more focused. So has most of it been really kind of focused on the SOC detection, engineering, that kind of stuff?
It's a good question. I think mine may look focused, but I'm a wanderer a little bit like you. And it started off really where, before doing any of that, I worked at a service provider, and that's right. Learned how to compile kernels and do all the cool things there super early. And that evolved to, doing some stuff and then getting involved in products when you see, oh, I want this thing to do this thing. And this really would help here, right? So if you go all the way back to the ISS Real Secure days, you go, oh yeah, that's what you don't do in a product. So let me see if I can figure out how to do something different.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of how it evolved, I think. And I love solving problems and also the community aspect of things. So I just feel super fortunate that on the path that we wander, you run into a bunch of really cool, like-minded people, and you get to do it together.
I was an ISS customer, so I get to appreciate that little joke you made there, that little jibe. Yeah, we had some interesting experiences with that suite of products. All of it too. The vulnerability scanner, the IDS IPS, both flavors of it, and Black Ice, which they acquired.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Absolutely.
All right. So, yeah. So tell me, like what took you to this point? To you've worked on the vendor side quite a bit, in different roles and things like that. Clearly anybody who's been product, probably has those kind of, if not aspirations, at least a skill set, to think about building something and going solo. So what led you down the path of building the tech team? Like, what were you seeing that made you say, this is something that needs to be done, that needs to be out there?
That's a great question. It really, the origin story here is kind of funny, but it's also super obvious. So when we were building content at, say, Splunk, right, the first correlation searches we would put into enterprise security, or we would build custom things for customers we would go see, or we were building the structured content that you expect to ship to people at Devo. The questions were always the same. How do you know this catches bad things? How do you know that this thing works? And we started doing something pretty cool in the DoD with some of the cyber weapons operators in the Air Force, and some of the requirements there, the same as for a lot of mature SOCs, are really pretty simple, but complex if you're trying to solve for them. And so we started building something here that would help us understand not how to build a adversary simulation platform, like how do I craft attacks. There's a lot of that.
Right.
Not how do I figure out how to tune detections. There's some of that, but how do I put these pieces together so that what I send I expect to get? And ironically, this is just testing. So in the sense of that, unit and integration testing for detection ecosystem becomes like a fairly obvious thing. And so we started with that construct there, largely because people were desperate to figure out they've invested all this money, including in things that I've built, right? So I'm as much a progenitor of this problem as anybody, to figure out how to make it effectively useful for their teams and cost manageable for what they're trying to accomplish.
And how did we get this far? How did we get this deep? 20, 30 years, like how old is Snort? It's over 20 years. It's not quite 30 years. We just interviewed Marty Resch a couple episodes ago. How did we get, and we talked a little bit about this too, right? And, but from your experience, from your perspective, how did we get this far without realizing, oh, we should probably make sure our snort rules work, or our sim detections and alerts do what we think they're going to do?
It's a good question. Like all things, I think when Snort came out and people were daily contributing to building VRTs and really testing stuff collectively as a community, it was an amazing time. But sort of a little bit as you start to productize everything and it becomes vendor oriented, the challenge is, what drives revenue? Well, shipping content drives revenue. We learned that from Microsoft and others. But the challenge becomes, how do I make sure that works for everybody? And most places don't have the luxury of, a ginormous, 200,000 square foot facility of every version of every operating system to run their AV tests in. And so, now consequently, the more complexity my environment has, the more complexity my, SIM problems should work with. And of course, that complexity is most fit for people of the same ilk. So you have this challenge of, we're building products that it takes an expert to understand how they work. It takes an expert to understand how to build detections. I mean, if you spend a little bit of time, you could write snort rules pretty quickly. You could also see results pretty quickly. You can figure out what you were doing. Nowadays, right, in order to generate the things necessary to make the complexity of a lot of the language that we've introduced is a hard thing. And certainly it's harder when we add compliance and audit and the requirements of resiliency into commercial and production infrastructure. So it may not be that we wandered down this path aimlessly, not thinking we would wind up here, but more that, the challenge of getting things implemented has always superseded getting things implemented well. And the metrics and measurements are now coming home to roost a little bit, where we start looking at continuous monitoring, continuous management, continuous posture, all of the continuous things, which I find interesting. As that, from a marketing perspective, it's become the new thing, but it's always been the thing.
Yeah, yeah, as if in hindsight, it seems kind of obvious. Like, did we really need to throw continuous on there to tell you that you should be brushing your teeth every day? That these things should be daily hygiene, procedural type stuff. But you hit on something I wanted to take a closer look at here. We find ourselves these days, with Snowflake and the incident happening there, with credential stuffing, and then maybe even a little bit with CrowdStrike here, where we find ourselves talking a lot about the shared responsibility line. And to what extent, maybe in hindsight, have we leaned too heavily on the vendors to do everything for us? And yeah, I think for me, I've built two SIEMs from the ground up in two separate organizations, and both times I used zero of what came out of the box. I threw it all away. All of it was useless to me. So from that point on, it became kind of obvious to me, but maybe it wasn't obvious for other products, for other practitioners. You know, um, and should vendors be encouraging folks, to kind of, that they're going to need to do some of this customization themselves, right, for their unique Snowflake environment? Well, pardon, pun not intended, but their environments are unique and they have their own stuff, and like the vendor can't build everything out of the box to work perfectly for you.
I love it. Yeah, the ground truth is, no vendor is going to be able to build the thing that works for you, right? All mileage will vary, and your risk requirements, your risk tolerance may be different. All of the other things. No vendor understands your business. That's your job, right? It's our job, right? Put the CISO hat back on. And the rigor behind that is really, how do I assemble those parts effectively? And I think, to get to your point, Adrian, it's a good question. Vendors aren't used to cohesive behaviors, right? They're not used to, hey, let's come together with my customer 001, ginormous Fortune 1000, maybe a financial company, and we're going to do a tabletop exercise for all of your technology stack, including ours, in your infrastructure, and make sure we're good. And that is an abnormal philosophy. Some people try to do that, especially with buying power, but it's a hard problem. So vendors are not sort of courted in this way, but also they're not rewarded in this way, right? And I think the challenge that we have on the practitioner side is, as a CISO, I don't. That's not my problem. That's your problem. That's a you problem, in that case. And I want you to come in my environment for me. And so the ground truth is, we shouldn't be maybe punishing vendors for not shipping content, but shipping capability.
Right.
And then we should make it easier for folks to be able to operate that capability so they can build what they need. Um, to be fair, though, that's also a class of organizations that can do that. We're still in a place where we're evangelizing the value of things like IDS and IPS to small, medium-sized businesses that probably, we were talking about this earlier, but just 2 weeks ago, right? I was at a friend's company, let's say, right, and we were dealing with RISDA, right, and the complexities of what it means for his business. And folks that have this kind of problem space should have easy access to ways to figure out if they're susceptible to it. Certainly, the insurers are going to be asking for that
Mhm.
capability. So, this is the challenge: is how do we get a kumbaya between vendors and insurers and the industry of folks that buy this technology stack to have something that helps drive consensus on what it is that we're doing, let alone the value proposition.
Right. Yeah, and it's I remember seeing it. It didn't take too long before vendors, I think, realized that they were going to have to eat some professional services for implementations to be successful. To hit the goals. And at the same time, more and more buyers, we're putting more stringent requirements in place. Like, we got to hit these goals. Like I remember Cylance, particularly. There's a rumor that they were, having a hard time being profitable because their whole professional services team, instead of doing paid work, were just helping customers get up and running. Like every new customer was like 2 weeks of customization to be able to weed out all the false positives that you're going to find with this machine learning driven model scanning binaries and things like that. Like NVIDIA drivers would look like malware, and we had all these things with weird amounts of um, randomness in the file that would kind of hit the edges of these models. Um, so yeah, how do you do that and not eat all the margins with professional services, right? And for some of these product categories, I think it's really tough to do.
I totally agree. There's also a set of expectations when you funded a company of what that deliverable looks like on success. Success isn't tied to an organization's ability to defend themselves, right? It's tied to the revenue generation, the number of opportunities, the pipeline, what's my EBITDA, all the things. But rarely are those metrics. By the way, those are the same metrics every company that is you know, a commercial entity is trying to accomplish the same set of problem spaces, that they're misaligned in the set of expectations that your cyber providers are also aligned the same way with different expectations. And I think the challenge we have is to figure out how to rotate around what those requirements are and provide some better metrics for people to operate with on both sides. And then I think we can say, hey, cool. We've added, 100 customers. That's awesome. We've implemented 100 customers, securely or successfully with a process for them to continue to grow, just like my security program is, a continuous execution strategy as much as anything else.
Yeah, Katie, you must have some questions by now.
I do have some questions. So we're talking about the professional services model, right? And I'm just curious if you think, because Adrian, you mentioned, the shared responsibility. Do you think that in terms of how security is right now and how overwhelmed security teams are and how just how much expertise you need on so many different types of tools, yet there are a million tools in every environment, do you think we've put ourselves in a position that it has to be sort of a partnership? Because I do think what's being sold for a lot of vendors is the idea that this is plug and play. It is super easy. You just have to do X, Y, and Z and you're going to be up and running. We know that's not true, but in this space in particular, this isn't something, it's not easy. It's never been easy. But I think because of how we market things, it makes it harder. But what have you actually seen? What are your feelings on how this should be packaged or marketed? Um, it's a big question. I've thought about it a lot because I work on a marketing team, but
Yeah.
How can vendors make sales without bullshitting? Is what it sounds like what you're asking.
oh, I'm trying to be so PC, Adrian.
It's good. It's good. Let me cut to the quick on that truth too. Um, no one should ever be punished for making their customer successful with services or whatever. Today, right, the shared responsibility model is also a little bit out of whack for yet another reason, which is a lot of these organizations, including mine, right, are SaaS providers. So the shared responsibility model is now split three ways or maybe more, depending on who all of these other providers are and how do you get to the quick of all of those things too. So why is, to tech team or pick another company, any different than me doing this thing? It's because it's all out of your control, from that operational capability. So from my perspective, there's no crime, there's no harm, there's no foul of saying, hey, look, yeah, we want to spend a month with you guys or 2 weeks with you guys or 6 weeks with you, whatever you need to get you successful. As soon as we stop thinking that services don't count towards product revenue and all of the ways that we, quantify the gap of a business, we can get to an easier path of, hey, or find a different, way of selling, a different, pricing model. But the bottom line is no one should ever get punished for making their customers successful. And as a CISO, if you don't want to give me services for free to make me successful, I'm super less interested in you, right? Because it doesn't matter whether I have talent or not. I also don't have time and context. So how long does it take me to get competent at your technology in addition to the, 26 others that I have? And who am I going to hire that has your competency, your skill set, right? That's an endangered species. And I'm not interested in trying to solve all those problems. I might also not be interested in adding in yet another technology just to figure out if I see something different. Everybody's got reduced budgets and diminishing bottom lines here for the security trade. And there's no reason we're still fighting the same fights that we have been for, 20 years.
And when it comes to selling solutions in a lot of spaces, there's a good amount of feature parity, right? It's really hard at certain levels to say tool A does X, Y, Z better. I think it comes down to experience of the team building it and an experience of the team providing that helping hand. And I think you hit on a really good point that it's not that we can't build this capability within our own organization, but we need the time and we need the money. Maybe the time is for somebody who can do it on their own. Maybe it's to hire somebody, but then they have to learn the organization. So, where do you see the balance in teams when they're onboarding this type of technology and when they're trying to really master something? Because that's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be, it should be a handheld, I think, situation so that customers get up to speed quicker so you don't spend a year or 3 years trying to figure out what do I do? How do I tune this? What makes it best?
Right. My investment in this shelfware is officially dead at the end of my, term. Right.
Right.
Um, I think there's a handful of things that come to bear here. The first of which is, as an organization, you really got to figure out what your priorities are. If you're investing in technology that are your top priorities, then absolutely that's where you're going to invest. The competency of the team, I've been blessed to have amazing security practitioners. And even with amazing security practitioners, it may not be worth the time to go build my own auth service, right? I mean, okay, jump cloud aside from that perspective, given that it is, an IDP, but the construct behind that is, what tools do I need my security folks to be really competent at? And here's where I think there's an interesting diversity. There's sort of a split between there are some really talented security folks who are maybe okay at writing software. There's a bunch of very talented software development engineers that may not be security people. And so what I've found is there's more gravity around turning developers and engineers and the security folks because of these problems like integration, because of things like, oh, well, I write detection. Detection engineering is just like writing any other piece of software. It's just detection that's code. So
Yeah.
Why would I have to go learn, how to I don't need to learn Git flow. I don't need to understand how GitHub works. I already do all that stuff every day.
I remember talking to Ryan Huber when he was over at Slack, and I remember him telling me, "Look, it's easier for me to hire developers and have them, teach them to do security things than the other way around because, the vast majority of the job is, yeah, I mean, it's you're not delivering code, but in some cases you are, right? It's more similar to those roles. Having an engineering background really kind of helps you with some of these principles. And the example I love to use here is Equifax. Thanks to the House Subcommittee's report, we know that they tried really hard to avoid that outcome that we all know now, that they lost data of 153 million Americans, very detailed credit data. And their emerging threat team produced a snort rule that should have detected or was intended to detect the vulnerability that they were worried about, the struts vulnerability, and they handed it off to the ops team who deployed it, but neither team thought to test it, right? To see if it worked, and it did not work. And I remember reading that. It really drove home for me. You know what? Security teams, like a lot of folks in security teams, don't have that kind of engineering, that developer background where you think, oh, I should test this now. Because, in my experience, every piece of code I've ever written doesn't work the first time out.
100%. And I think to come also bring that back to, Katie's question, there's a lot of circles of where, hey, I'm not interested in any of the marketing around this, right? I'm going to ask other CISOs, which happens all the time. Hey, have you used this? What was your experience? Did you do a POC here? How was the support? Right. And did these guys get in the seat with you? That kind of a thing. But you're also seeing like a number of conversations happen around. There's a little startup called Hackerverse TV, and they are basically trying to put a battle bot challenge together for, my team doesn't have to learn how to use your new thing to figure out if it meets my requirements. Make that super low tension. And then you've got guys like Arsenic who are saying and Trade Forward are like, hey, look, uh, I don't care about all that stuff. Just show me the demo. Show me how it works. Prove it to me that it does the things. And there's a little bit of like, how much do you want to enable that to get to the real truth? Sometimes it's going to hurt, but I guarantee it's going to be better for.
Yeah, and it's I understand not all product categories work well with that, but there's something to be said. When something can survive like B2C, the expectation for a consumer, password databases and things like that is a really tough one, because they can be complex to use. But when you're building for that, that's like the ultimate in usability. Can't be shelfware. The moment it's shelfware, a consumer's not going to pay for it anymore. They're going to cancel that subscription. Whereas in the B2B world, you know, you can have 10% of your budget just sitting on the shelf, and maybe nobody even notices that it's not producing any value. Like that's just it's funny that the less dollars you spend, the higher the expectation and the requirements get for that product to work. And if you don't have a trial, they're not even going to consider you maybe. So it's interesting. It's interesting because on the developer side, and as we see more and more security products kind of built and sold towards DevOps teams, who are also doing security, uh, they all have free trials, or they're built on top of open source. Like you start to see that more of a B2C type of build mentality than this. Hey, the FireEye, we're going to drop off a black box and it's going to solve all your problems kind of mentality, right?
Right. No, that's 100%. And the other benefit that you get there is you get this, on the unit testing, integration testing thing, you get the ability to integrate that into other stuff in a trial, in an evaluation without having to get, 50 calls. So there's a cool thing about that sort of enablement with SaaS and product led growthy type things that I think is really cool. The other part is, what you mentioned, the community aspect of this. Like if there's 1,000 guys like me, right, testing out software or using this open source something or other, there's a community edition of this. Guaranteed, it's going to be more solid because it's got more at bats. And fundamentally, you're going to see a lot of unvarnished truths, and that's really helpful. Again, maybe painful, But who doesn't really want deep down the unvarnished truth?
Right. And even being on the vendor side, sometimes it's hard to find that unvarnished truth. Like you end up doing a lot of sales to portfolio companies under the same investor. Like sales that aren't really users of the product. That uh, you're going to get some nice quotes. Some pretty case studies that you get to publish, but you don't get a whole lot of people like really trying to use the product, and failing with the product and telling you why they failed with the product. So yeah, it's spot on.
There's a huge thing about, I think every builder has some version of this truth in their heart. But if you're not building something that's purposeful and useful, it doesn't feel as good, right? You haven't done the thing. Maybe your company's successful, that's cool. But if we sat down and asked, Ron Gula or Marty or and any of the old salts, right? Ollie, Friedrichs, any of these guys that have built products that have done something and mattered and also been commercially successful, that's the part. And all of those have some level of interaction open
Funny
source.
is I've talked to all those guys and they still have some of those regrets, that you voiced as well. That red they feel in their ledger that that like they made the problem worse than better at some point because of something they just didn't know at that point. The industry was young and we were still trying to figure out what worked and didn't work. Um, but yeah, I agree. When you've got that, it's better for the industry, and I worry that we don't have enough of that out there. So before we wrap here, Fred, what do you think we can do? Given how startups are funded, how most of the cybersecurity industry is funded, is there a way we can align, both the expectations and the needs of the enterprise with what those companies have to do to grow at the expected rate? There any and you could say no also, but I don't know if you have any tips on how we could maybe better align that.
Super good. It's a hard problem and a hard question too. I think let's come back to the unvarnished truth. Um, as a CISO, right? I'm going to invite vendors in and I'm going to tell you exactly what my problems are. Exactly. I'm going to tell you why they're my problems and what situations I need to remedy.
Transparency on both sides.
That's right. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to do the best things for your teams. And on the vendor side, if you're treating that as something, less, less a relationship of trust, then that's on you, and that's going to be difficult to do business repeatedly, with that sort of mindset. The bottom line is everybody's got to come to this truth with the same level of understanding in order to win. And yeah, that's a hard problem. And I'm not sure everybody's going to be as, altruistic about it. But if we want to solve it, there's an easy way. And that is, let's make the unvarnished truth, the method of the day, the way that we communicate. There's no secrets behind, the security by obscurity problem space. And everyone knows these problems. It's like that scene in Untouchables, where they kick in the door and, hey, what are you prepared to do? You want to stop bootleggers? Well, it's in the post office, right?
It's not just startups either. Like I'm kind of posing this as a startup issue, but I've talked to folks who have had way too many drinks before and shouldn't have been telling me this stuff. That worked at very large public cybersecurity vendors. Just come out and say, yeah, you know what? I lie to customers all the time. They ask me if it can do that. Yeah, can it make hard-boiled eggs? Yeah, sure. Can it make soft-boiled eggs? Sure. Can it peel it for me? Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, whatever. Can it dye it different colors for Easter? Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, because that's just because
Absolutely.
those organizations are so big that and the way that they're incentivized, they can do it at that point, and there's never any recourse for it when that customer later finds out it can't do all those things.
There's also this whole idea, right? Capitalism, free market competition, right? It's a competitive business. There's a lot of money in it, right? So again, like the altruism can go out the window. And I think where we want to conduct ourselves in the way is, again, if we're building something purposeful and useful for people. We have a community edition we're releasing
Oh,
at
great.
Black Hat DEF CON next week. We have content we're releasing. and all of those types of things for people to get in the mix. That is the start.
So you're walking the walk over there.
That's right. It's the only way to do it. And what we hope is when CISOs talk about this in those circles, right, the conversation isn't, well, I'm not totally sure if that does what it says it does, or I'm not totally sure I can trust the outcomes. We're focused on quality, accuracy, and coverage from a testing perspective. You're always going to see things you don't want to see, and that's okay. It's when you don't see that, that's what I get worried. So we do want to live the mantra, right?
Yeah. And you just have to manage those expectations, right?
That's right. It's easy enough not to lie to somebody, right? And depending on what your role is, if you're incented to do it, it's a different problem, but it's easy enough not to lie to somebody and say, yep, we absolutely do that today.
Yeah, whole company needs to be on that same page, though, so you don't have these Dilbert like sales versus engineering situations where.
Yeah, I don't know if that's solvable, bro. But if you don't start at the top, it's guaranteed not to wind up at the bottom, right? So, I think there's some leadership that can be applied here. Enough people know this problem, feel this pain. It can be something we can actively take to the streets, right? It can be a movement. It's possible.
Yeah. All right, Fred. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. Really good conversation here.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right. Stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about security researcher qualities marketers should adopt with Danny Wolf from Audience First and Cybernest.